to the Friday, December 14th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Had to do some scrambling. You know, you learn new lessons as you go with this endeavor. In the first few months of doing it, we had a interview scheduled. Won't say who. Don't want to embarrass them. But it didn't happen. And so had to improvise this morning, and no better person to improvise with than Ryan McGee of ESPN.com, good buddies with Marty Smith, colleagues, tremendously entertaining duo, and Ryan is entertaining in his own right, and so we have a really fun conversation with him. Football team, actually, as I record this, is going to get back out to the practice fields for its third on-campus bowl practice, and plenty of coverage from that, of course, and also as they make their final turn down to the stretch for the early signing period. Plenty of recruiting information and intel from Paul Strelo. Nobody better to deliver that than Paul. Does a fantastic job, so I'm sure all of you subscribers to TigerIllustrated.com can attest to that. If you're listening and you're not a subscriber, no better time than now to come aboard. Would love to have you. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Marty Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in Greenville. Very happy to have them aboard. Couldn't do it without them. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, both huge fans. Forte of their firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. I can vouch for them. About 10 years ago, a family member had a pretty serious medical situation with one of the local hospitals, went to Blake Smith, and he very quickly and authoritatively gave us some great advice, and we were very thankful for that. Parham Smith and Archenhold offers free consultations. Give them a call, 864-990-4581 or parhamlaw.com. Also sponsoring the Dubcast is the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, a short Trevor Lawrence throw from Death Valley. Man, it is a favorite for the ESPN folks who come into town, who stay there various times of the year. Also, man, it is booked up and packed to the gills for home football weekends. It has really caught on for people who want to come in and stay. Also, Taps Bar and Cafe, a really cool spot to go hang out during the week. If you want to grab a drink with some friends, some of you professors out there who want to wind down after work, laid-back alternative to some of the more boisterous college bars in downtown Clemson. So go check them out if you already haven't. Got some really good beers on tap, including my favorite, the Hugie Street IPA. So check them out online at theabernathy.com. All right, let's get to the main event, our conversation with Ryan McGee of ESPN and ESPN.com. Enjoy. Okay, we are here with Ryan McGee of ESPN and the Marty and McGee show. Did I get that right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're still in such disbelief that there is one of those shows that you can call it whatever you want.
All right, so how did that start? Y'all had a podcast before, right? For how long?
Yeah, in fact, it's funny, Marty and I were driving back from the College Football Awards a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this. I want to say it was 2013 or 2014, we started a podcast. So, Marty and I have been friends for 20 years. And so we were coworkers forever at ESPN on the NASCAR side. And we were driving up to Martinsville one morning going to a race. And we got so tickled laughing, talking about nothing. And we actually got out and took a selfie in front of this weird statue in front of some ranch. That's actually the picture that they used for our logo. And I said to him, I used to be a TV producer. And I said to him, I feel like if we recorded this, people wouldn't believe, like, just the stuff that we talk about. And like, maybe we could do something with it. And so we called the people at ESPN Audio, and we pitched the idea of just give us like a pilot. Just let us do one podcast and see what you think. And we did a podcast for probably about 2 years, and that turned into a radio show, and then impossibly we did some TV in the fall of 2018, and it was we honestly, after every show, Larry, Marty and I look at each other and we're like, well, that's it. They're going to shut us down now. And they haven't yet. So, knock on wood, we keep doing it.
What is your take on podcasts? How, I guess like 10 years ago, they sort of became popular, but then they died. And now, I guess, I don't know, I could be getting the time frame wrong, but maybe like the last 4 or 5 years, they've exploded again. In your opinion, is that just the ease of listening, like you can get them on your iPhone and all that, and sort of the whole a la carte revolution?
Yeah, no, I think a la carte is it. I mean, I got a 14-year-old daughter, and I remember when she was just a baby, and everything that she watched or consumed, whether it was audio or video, whatever, she was born. She showed up about the same time the DVR showed up, right? TiVo and all that stuff, and so. Her entire life, if she wants to watch something or listen to something, she just watches it or listens to it. That's why we have Netflix now. That's why we have all this stuff. And so I think about when she started watching the network show with us a few years ago, like Survivor on CBS. And the episode ends, and she's like, oh, my gosh, that was amazing. Let's watch the next one. Or like, you got to wait a week. And she just couldn't believe it. So, yeah, I just think it's a changing the way that people consume everything. And, but yeah, and even when we do our radio show, which our radio show will come back in the middle of January, we do it on Saturday mornings, and it does very well. But, you don't do a radio show unless there's a podcast attached to it. As soon as our radio show is over on Saturday mornings, immediately on Twitter, it's when will the podcast be up? And so I think it's exactly right. It's exploded because people want to consume whatever on their own time, and and as a result, it's exploded. There's a lot of great podcasts. There's a lot of bad ones, but there's also a lot of great podcasts out there. And
so, are you and Marty physically together when you do your radio show / podcast?
No, because we're never. We both live in Charlotte, but we're never here. Particularly, we don't do the radio show in the fall because we just can't, because we're both on airplanes going to football games somewhere. But even in this winter and spring, I think last year we did the radio show. We start on January 12th this year. We start the weekend after the national championship game. And last year we did the same thing. And I want to say we were in the same place at the same time for maybe 2 radio shows between the middle of January and Labor Day weekend. Now, this year we're going to do a TV simulcast starting on the SEC network and hopefully moving on to some other networks. And they haven't quite figured out logistics of that yet, because a lot of times if you listen to our radio show, Marty's in the lobby of a Courtyard Marriott somewhere, and I'm I'm in the my room in some other hotel somewhere. And so we have these boxes that we travel with, and we can do live radio from wherever. I've done my radio show in my truck. I've done it in the attic of my uncle's mountain house. I mean, I've done it anywhere I can plug that thing in and get to the internet. I'll do a radio show.
Yeah, so it's the technology of the equipment, the recording as well, or the broadcasting. Because Andy Staples, it's not a podcast. He has a Sirius XM radio show. He does his from all over too, and he told me on a recent podcast a couple of months ago, he had to do one in the business office of a hotel, and it was drawing some mean looks because he had to be you have to be loud, and he was disturbing people. But it's almost like back in the old newspaper days when you're covering a high school game on a Friday night on deadline, and you're just trying to find somewhere, anywhere to send in your story. And I guess the same deal when you're either recording a podcast or a live radio show. Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I tell people all the time, I'm the king of the McDonald's Wi-Fi. McDonald's has ridiculously good Wi-Fi. And, Starbucks, everybody wants to be very quiet. At the McDonald's, everybody's got their kids in there. So a lot of times if you listen to like the Marty McGee radio show / podcast, Marty has been multiple times has done play-by-play of people making coffee in the lobby of the hotel while he's just sitting there. And so, we've done it from everywhere. We did the show together
from Gasoline Alley at the Indy 500 last year, and we did the show together from, I think, Daytona, from the Daytona 500. Only 2 times we did the show together. And that's what's been so great about the TV show is it was funny. We did the TV show together this fall, and it was like this whole other level of communication because we were actually see each other. It's like it was this whole like, oh, well, I can actually react to what you're saying right now because we're actually sitting in the same place at the same time. And people that worked on the TV show were like, you guys look so surprised to be looking at each other. I'm like, yeah, this never happens. And so he's one of my best friends in the world, but we literally never see each other because we're going somewhere all the time. And we certainly never see each other in Charlotte. We live about 30 minutes apart, and we never see each other. That's why we were so excited to ride back in my truck together, coming back from the College Football Awards. We laughed the whole way home, just a couple weeks ago.
Tell us about the process for the TV show that y'all do and the concept behind that.
Well, so, the radio show, 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday mornings. And I literally, if I am home, my alarm goes off and I go down into my basement and turn on the radio box 10 minutes before air. And Marty does the same wherever he is. And it's very loose. Like we know, top of the show, we'll talk about, something that happened in sports on Friday night. We're the first live show on ESPN Radio of the weekend, so we want to hit that. And then it's just kind of whatever. And the callers kind of take us in crazy directions, and sometimes we get in trouble because we might go an hour without talking about sports. We talk about a lot of stuff, and it might be somewhat sports-related, but, if we start talking about the Dukes of Hazzard, I can guarantee you we're going to kill the next hour talking about that. And then people call in and respond to it. And so when we started the television show, obviously you can't be that loose. But the spirit of the radio show, I think they've done a great job of letting us do that. We got a couple great producers on the show and a great director, and they just kind of let us roll with it. And, we always do hillbilly headlines, which, being a proud son of the Carolinas, there's plenty of material that just comes directly from home. And then obviously Florida too. So there's staples that we have. Rooster Rewind, where we kind of recap what we did over the last week. Cooter the Rooster has kind of become our mascot. We made him up out of thin air, and so those things transferred over to the TV show. And but it's a football show. It's a fall show, and so when we come in, obviously we want to hit some of the big stories from the weekend of college football. And I know the show initially airs on the SEC network, but it re-airs on ESPN2, it re-airs on ESPN News, and so, we don't, I think one of maybe the misnomers about our show is, or myths about our show is all we're going to talk about is Tua. And the reality is, I lobbied hard for Kyler Murray on an SEC network show for the Heisman, and so we don't get flack for that. So we talk about football, and then we talk about where we were over the weekend, and then we talk about rednecks getting arrested, which is basically that's the show.
How does your itinerary get determined? Is it up to you where you? I mean, you were in Clemson for the South Carolina game,
right?
Was that just you saying, I think I want to go to Clemson, or is anything deeper than that?
Well, Clemson was the last team I had not seen in the top 10 by that weekend. And I kind of had that game circled. I mean, obviously, I think South Carolina, certainly over the last 2 years, has been better than anybody thought they were going to be because they're still in the middle of a reconstruction. And so, I knew I would get to Clemson at some point during the year, and I always kind of had that game circled. And so typically for me, it's pretty spur of the moment. Like, we wait and see what happens one weekend, and then that might determine where I go the next weekend. A lot of what I do is I go in on Monday. Like if Penn State's playing Michigan and it's going to be a big game, and we know it's going to be a big game, I'll go to Penn State on Monday and interview James Franklin and maybe hang out for a couple of days and write a feature for ESPN.com off of that leading into the game. I've told her I go to a lot of bad games because they're the games that lead into the good games because I'm writing something that's a preview for the next game up. But this year was a little bit different, and I went to a lot of games, which I didn't really do last year. And so I wanted to make sure, I had seen Oklahoma, I'd seen Ohio State, I'd seen Alabama, I'd seen Georgia, I'd seen almost everybody. I'd seen Washington, I'd seen almost everybody in the top 10 except for Clemson. And so I had that game circled and wanted to make sure I got down there. And I had to hang out with you, so that's good.
Yeah, we sat beside each other. Did you write anything from that game?
It's interesting because I didn't write anything off that game, but I'm going to write some stuff heading into the playoff based on that game, based on what I saw. And so, but it's interesting, too, because I write, but we do the TV show, and I'm doing radio all the time. And, we do our campus conversation podcast on ESPN.com. And so it's really just kind of information that I take from that I use everywhere. And it's kind of a perspective thing. What really helped me was, I had seen all the great quarterbacks. I had seen Ian Book. I saw Notre Dame play Stanford. I had seen Dwayne Haskins. I'd seen Tua. I'd seen everybody, but I hadn't seen Clemson's guy. And so it was important for me to get in there and see him in person. And you and I sat there and talked about him during the game. And there were a couple throws that he had in person that you just had to see to appreciate. And so I think that for me, it's kind of a big picture perspective that will certainly help me, when I get on the plane and go out to Northern California for the championship game. If Clemson's there, then I will certainly write something really big going into that game. And being at that South Carolina game is going to be really, the biggest help for that.
All right. Quite often, the best seat in the house these days is on your couch because of massive television, all the great camera angles that ESPN and other networks provide. And, of course, if you have a really good analyst, you actually are educated about the game as you're watching it.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what can you see in person that is not accessible if you're watching the game on TV?
Well, I think it's the small stuff. Like, I'll give you the best example is Kyler Murray at Oklahoma. I knew Kyler Murray was good. I knew he could play football. I had seen him at A&M. I certainly knew about him coming out of high school. But I went to the Oklahoma game at Texas Tech in Lubbock. It was middle of the season. And so I get to the stadium. I got there early, and Todd McShay and Brian Greasy were there with the ESPN ABC TV crew. And both of those guys said, get out of the press box, go to the sideline, and watch Kyler Murray during warm-ups. And I'm like, why? They're like, you just need to go see him in person. And they're like, and if you can get away with standing on the sideline some during the game, do it. And I was like, okay, guys, how big of a deal could it be? And it shocked me. It really did. First of all, Kyler Murray looks me eye to eye. I cover Baker Mayfield a lot. He's bigger than Murray. I covered Russell Wilson in college. He's bigger than Murray. But it shocked me how small he was. But he was so fast, and his arm was so strong, and you could see it in pregame. And it really takes a lot. I mean, man, we both stood on the sideline for a lot of pregame warm-ups, and it really takes something to get your attention. And I left that game believing he was the best player in the country. And I preached it and preached it and preached it. And I love Tua. I love Haskins. I love all those guys. But Murray was just crazy talented. And for all the talk about the Big 12 defenses, and the game I was at was crazy. And, in fact, Texas Tech had a 2-point conversion attempt to tie the game with just a couple of minutes to go. And that was intercepted and returned 90-something yards. And Oklahoma went up 4 after almost being tied. And so Murray has to play like that all the time. And so the fact that he's done it and has done it with almost zero mistakes, that's what I'm talking about. We always talk about in the college football playoff era, we talk about the eye test. And for me, seeing these guys in person, you can't really, Christian Wilkins looks great on television, but until you really see him in person, away from the ball and the things that he does to affect plays, it's just, I still am a believer that if you see it in person, it makes a big difference.
When you're at a game, do you feel, is it your responsibility to be engaged on social media during that game?
To a point, I think that when Twitter was really getting rolling, and you still see it in the press, it's kind of a smart aleck contest. Everybody's trying to, post the funniest thing and look around the press box like, did everybody see that? And, what kind of reaction did I get? And it's easy to get trapped in that. And I watch guys now will sit there and they're staring at the computer the whole game. And the game's right there. Literally, just bring your eyes up 2 inches. It's happening right there. And so I'll sit and watch sports writers watch GIFs and video clips of the game that they're sitting there watching.
It's amazing.
It's crazy. And so, to me, and listen, I don't ever criticize anyone else's approach. You do it however you want to do it. But it drives me a little bit crazy. But I am also guilty of, vanishing down that spider hole. I'll do it. I'll sit there and start going back and forth with people watching the game or snarking it up or whatever. And next thing you know, you look up and you've missed 7 minutes of game action. And listen, and I've been to a lot of games that were 35-point games in the fourth quarter. You know what? At that point, you do whatever you want. But if it's still a close game, particularly with two really good teams, and you're supposed to be writing off the game or learning something while you're watching the game, then yeah, it's and I'm guilty of that just in life. I was almost, my daughter was almost late to school this morning because I started flicking through Twitter when I should have been packing her lunch.
Yeah, the routine I have, or the rules, I guess. So, I'm engaged on my message board on my website because those are my subscribers. They're paying me. And so, I'm on the in-game thread for most of the game, but I'll post during a timeout.
Right.
And on Twitter, I will never scroll through the feed.
Yeah.
I'll make maybe like a comment pregame, another at halftime, and then maybe one more.
Yeah.
Just because there's a picture, an Alabama beat writer, I forgot which one it is, but his profile background image on Twitter is of the press box at Alabama during a game. And the funniest thing about it is there's like maybe 30 sports writers in the press box, and one of them is actually watching the game.
Right.
The other 29, their heads are buried in their computers, and we don't know the context of that. I mean, that might have been the end of a game. And
sure.
They might have all been on deadline, but still, it speaks to how hard it is to just concentrate on what you're paid to concentrate on.
Yeah. No, it's crazy, and it's But again, it's just it's the nature of the business right now and the nature of the beast. And I'll be curious 10 years from now if you and I are both still fortunate enough to get paid to go to games, what everybody's doing in the press box then. Or even if they're let us sit in the press box. We'll probably sit in the trailer in the parking lot, right? This is electric.
That's right.
But it's it's just the nature of it. And but like I say, I'm as guilty as anyone of doing it, especially when you're at a bad game. Like if I'm at Oklahoma UTEP, I was at that. That was Oklahoma's opener a year ago. Well, I was there because I was at the Ohio State game on Thursday night, and I was at the Oklahoma game on Saturday night because Oklahoma and Ohio State were playing the next weekend. So I'm writing a preview. So I saw Ohio State at Indiana, terrible game, and I saw UTEP at Oklahoma, terrible game. But I'm still there to watch the teams that I'm there to watch, and so. Kyler Murray got into that game in the second half. So I wish I'd paid more attention at the time. So you got to keep your eyes up and take your notes. And what's funny too is then the people that have their eyes down and weren't watching the game, they get mad at you because you had something in your piece that they didn't see. And I'm like, eyes up, fellas.
That's right. Yeah, there's nothing worse than going to a tailgate after the game and somebody says, "Hey man, did you see that play where the right guard just destroyed the defensive end?" Oh crap, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I was too busy responding to Spanky 41-21 for his. He didn't like what I wrote about his team last week.
Oh, all right, Ryan, you have had a really good window into Marty Smith's progression.
Yeah,
and it's just fascinating the transition that he made from NASCAR. That's his personality. Obviously, his shtick is perfect for NASCAR, but he really broke the mold when he went over to college football, just because that wasn't the convention. A Southern guy not being afraid to speak how he is. What's your sort of perspective on that transition and how he made it, and sort of the before and after? Yeah,
well, and I always tell everybody I'm kind of Marty. It's kind of Marty's fullback. I was covering NASCAR and college football, and I remember when Marty called me and he said, because Marty had a chance to leave. When the NASCAR contract changed hands and NASCAR and ESPN was no longer involved, Fox and NBC were the new NASCAR partners. Marty and I talked to both of them about the possibility of leaving ESPN and going, and Marty and I talked about, Marty said they really want me to do some college football stuff, and I was like, first of all, you're going to love it. Second of all, I knew him well enough to know him. He was on a state championship winning high school football team in Giles County, Virginia, and so I knew, or Giles High School, I knew that he was going to be great. But I told him, I said, listen, you're going to get beat up a little bit. I said, just because of exactly what you're talking about. His approach is very aggressive, and it's loud, and it's different. And you know the deal. You have to kind of win over the coaches. Once you win over the coaches, you're going to be okay. And he got resistance in the beginning, and I've always given him so much credit for digging in his heels and staying true to himself. And my favorite part of the Marty Smith experience is how people are always like, well, that's so fake, right? There's no way he can be like that. He's like that all the time.
Yeah.
He's like that at Panera Bread. He's like that everywhere. It's just how he is. And so he stays true to himself, and I think once the coaches realize that he's the genuine article and that's just how he is. Urban Meyer is the greatest example. Marty tells the story all the time. When he was assigned to Ohio State, was really his first big college football assignment. And they assigned 4 reporters to the 4 teams that made the college football playoff. It was the inaugural year of the playoff. And Urban Meyer couldn't have been a bigger jerk to Marty. And later apologized to him, and they actually became pretty close. I mean, Marty had a lot of information on Urban Meyer leading into this retirement that not a lot of people had, because he established a relationship with Urban Meyer. But Meyer told him, Urban said, he was mad because he said he's looking at the 4 teams in the playoff, and these guys got Tom Rinaldi. And these other guys, got Reese Davis. And so-and-so got like Sam Ponder. Like everybody got an established college football reporter, and Ohio State got Marty Smith. And Urban saw that as an insult. And what he didn't realize, that no one really realized at the time, was that it wasn't an insult at all. It was a compliment. It was this SportsCenter's guy. And so, Marty earned Urban Meyer's respect because of the way he handled his business, and I think it's just been that way throughout. And it's just awesome. And listen, I tell everybody, if you don't like Marty, blame me, because I was the first TV producer to put him on television. I used to produce a nightly NASCAR show called Totally NASCAR for Fox Sports Net, and we needed an insider. I had plenty of crew chief, driver, analysts, but I needed like a Peter Gammons. I needed like a writer insider. And Marty was at NASCAR.com then, and I went to Marty and said, I'd like to bring you on TV just to see how it goes. And that was in 2003. And so I tell everybody, I take full credit for Marty being on television, but if you want to blame somebody, then blame me.
How long did it take Urban to warm to him?
It didn't take long, So Marty was embedded with the team for like 2 weeks leading into the inaugural college football playoff, and so he's there every day. And listen, and Urban is one of these guys that's a consumer. If it's written about him or said about him, he's read it and he saw it. I mean, he watches it all. He might tell you that he doesn't, but he does. And so everything that Marty did during those couple weeks, Urban Meyer watched it and he read it. And so when he realized that this wasn't a joke, that this guy was the genuine article and worked as hard as he worked, it's not any different than you or me. If a coach realizes that he might not agree with something I wrote, I might not agree with something that I said, but if he knows that I don't have an angle, that was my honest opinion, and he saw me put in the work, and he knows that the interview we just did wasn't a sham, then that's how you earn the respect of those guys. And Martin certainly did that with Urban Meyer.
I'm guessing it didn't take Dabo long to start getting along with Marty.
No, I think there has to be some DNA shared between those two somewhere. There has to be some sort of. I feel like they have to be distant cousins because, a lot of the same things that you hear about Marty is what you hear about Dabo and vice versa. Well, there's no way he can really be like that, right? This has all got to be a show. I get that all the time from when Dabo first really became a national figure, over the last 6-7 years. I got that a lot from, people who were just now figuring out who this guy was. Well, he can't really possibly be like that, right? I'm like, that's how he is pretty much all the time. I mean, that's him. So I think that's why, and, nobody believed that Dabo Swinney should have that job that he had. I mean, we all remember it. And, everybody, even those of us who liked him, thought it was a terrible mistake. And so I think you could probably apply that same sentence to a lot of people's feelings about Marty Smith. And so I think that's why the two of them get along so well.
Business owners out there, if you own a business that accepts credit cards, you need to listen up. Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, run by Clemson folks, is changing the face of payment processing, quickly becoming the most cost-effective solution for all small businesses. Tandem's program saves you up to 90% on processing charges and gives your customers what they love most, choices. This is not some crazy introductory offer. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. If you want to know more, visit tandempayment.com today. Former Tiger Hot Rod McDowell works over there at Tandem Payment. They handle all their business and customer service face-to-face. So give them a call, 864-672-1570, if you're tired of spending an arm and a leg on all those credit card processing fees. Did you grow up in Rockingham, Ryan?
Yeah. So, and Marty and I joke all the time. I'm the Kenny Chesney of hometowns. Like, Kenny Chesney, his favorite team is whatever town he's playing in. He wears, and as a Tennessee alum, it's a very sore subject in Knoxville. That Kenny Chesney, if he's playing a concert in Birmingham, he's wearing either an Alabama or Auburn jersey or wherever he's playing. But yeah, I was born in Rockingham, North Carolina. Lived in Shelby. Lived in Raleigh. Moved to Travelers Rest, and then eventually ended up in Charlotte.
Your dad was a referee. Fascinating part of your story is you traveled around with him to games. That's how you grew up?
Yeah, no, it was huge. It was my dad was a small college official when I was growing up, and then eventually started working ACC games. My father was a small college official in the Carolinas Conference, what became in the SAC-8 back in the day. And then he moved into Division I as an ACC official in 1981, and his first game was at Clemson. And I'm trying to remember who it was now. It was not a good game. It was a small college at Clemson in 81. But I'd never forget, we were living in Raleigh, and Dad coming home, and him, I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but that was pretty awesome. That was his first experience in Death Valley. Of course, they're, national champions and all that. And so that was his baptism into big-time college football was Death Valley. And quite frankly, it spoiled him because in the ACC, I think his next ACC game was like at Wake Forest. And he's like, oh, wait, everywhere's not like Clemson.
That must have been Wofford, the opener, when I think the score might have been tied at halftime or something like that. It was really close.
I still, somewhere in my house, I have. The big deal was, I remember he said his only place, it was like this forever, the only place he went to, they had the officials' locker room at Death Valley, and they had a plaque, orange plastic plaque that said McGee that was over his locker. And he was so excited about that personalized plaque, he took it down and brought it home with him. And for years, I had that on the door of my room as a kid growing up. And so, and it was funny because Clemson always did that, and no one else I think ever did until we got into like the 2000s.
All right, so you started going to games with him like mid to late 80s when you were like 12 or 13? Yeah.
So my first credentials, my first sideline credentials were North Carolina at Virginia, 1983. So I just turned 13. And I was on the sideline with a photographer's pass. I had my camera that Santa Claus had brought to me the year before. And Barry Word was ACC player. Won the game diving over the corner of the end zone. And the linebacker who missed the tackle completely cleaned my clock. I mean, just blew me up. Yard sale. And I weighed about 85 pounds. And everybody was worried, and on the Jefferson Pilot telecast, you used to be able to, you could see something happened. They never showed me, but it was me everybody was attending to in the end zone. And when I stood up, everybody was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "That's the coolest thing that's ever happened ever." I was like, I remember, it was like a few weeks later. It was at Duke, like Maryland at Duke, and Maryland was so good then, Bobby Ross and all that. And I remember same thing, had a sideline pass, and a lot of the older photographers were really helping me out. And at halftime, we went up to the press box and had like a barbecue sandwich and a Pepsi and a cookie, and watched the band. And Miss North Carolina came through the press box and introduced herself. And at halftime, we went back downstairs. I was like, "Y'all getting paid to do this?" And so immediately, at the age of 13, I was like, "I got to figure out a way to get paid to do this."
So when you got laid out, was your dad attentive to that? Like, was he able to?
Oh yeah, no. It was quick. Like I popped. You know, when you're that age, you're made out of rubber, and so my biggest concern was my camera, and it was okay. So I popped up, and I was good.
All right, your first experience coming to Death Valley.
Well, say that again. You're breaking up.
Your first experience coming to Death Valley. You have a good recollection of that?
Oh yeah, no. It would have been an NC State game, like 84, 85, that same era. And full disclosure now, I'm growing up in Raleigh in the 80s, so I was an NC State fan. And so, my father, who actually wasn't working the game, he was trying to remember where he was that weekend, but I went to the state game. So Dad was not allowed to work NC State games because we lived in Raleigh. Now, he could have cared less about NC State football, but the rules were you couldn't work a game of your alma mater, you couldn't work a game of the city that you lived in, and you couldn't work a game of where your kids went to school. So when my brother went to Wake and I went to Tennessee, he couldn't work Tennessee or Wake Forest games. Now, he worked plenty before that, but he couldn't work East Carolina games because he went to ECU, and he couldn't work NC State games. Now, here's the thing, and you know this as a sports writer too. People don't believe when I say this. I don't care who wins and loses the games. I really don't. And where I went to school or who I grew up as a fan of does not affect how I watch these games at all. And I learned that from Dad because Dad had no loyalties. I learned really early on that it was crazy to me. I'm thinking, how could he not care who's going to win this game today? He didn't. He really didn't. He checked it at the door. And so I learned that from him. But, yeah, my first Death Valley experience would have been mid-'80s from Raleigh to Clemson, to Traverse Rest. Dad worked at Furman. And you talk about a lonely distance in the late 80s, me wearing all my NC State Wolfpack red and white, and I'm at Traverse Rest High School where everybody there was wearing orange. And so, but I tell you this, that was the height of the Textile Bowl. That was Dick Sheridan was at NC State, and obviously Coach Ford was still at Clemson. And man, there were some great games during that stretch. And one of my greatest memories was I was at the Textile Bowl. I came back from school and was at the Textile Bowl when Ken Hatfield rolled out the purple jerseys.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and my dad's working that game, and my best friend from high school, we're sitting in the end zone before it was renovated, and we're sitting on the top row of the end zone, and we saw the team come out and get on the bus.
Oh wow!
So we saw those purple jerseys, and I swear no one else in the stadium had seen it. And Dad worked at Furman, and we were sitting behind these guys, and they were full on, man, the orange overalls and the whole deal. And we knew it was coming. And when the team showed up at the top of the hill across the stadium, and they were in those purple jerseys, and I'll never forget, I leaned up to those old guys. And the place fell silent, Larry. It was crazy because people just didn't know. They weren't 100% sure what to think. I'll never forget, I leaned up to those guys in front of me. I go, those guys at Furman are going to be mad. And they go, what? I go, y'all stole their jerseys. And those guys, I thought we were going to get in a fight. But it ended up being a great, Clemson won again, it ended up being a great game. But I remember State tried some crazy fake play. Like a guy was checking out of the game and actually ended up hanging out by the sideline and catching a pass downfield. It was a great game. But, yeah, you talk about an interesting experience. Moving to Traverse Rest as an NC State guy in the late 80s, that was a lonely life.
Yeah, Dick Sheridan had Danny's number in 86, 87, 88, won all three of those games. And those 87, 88 Clemson teams were really good. And a score that I still cannot process. In 1987, this is not the spread era, right? NC State was up 30-0 in Death Valley. How does that happen? I still can't process it.
No, it was crazy. And it was and you know the deal, it was it's one of those that once you get in their head, it was a great. I mean, again, it was a great time, but it made for a lot of lonely. And there weren't a lot of people in the cafeteria wanting to talk to me on Monday at Travelers Rest when I came trucking in there with my Go Wolfpack sweatshirt.
Ryan, fast forwarding to the present, what do you make of what Dabo has constructed here? You have a lot of background and context just from your experiences, and also. I guess we'll just get you to answer that, and then we'll move on to the playoff.
Well, it's stunning. I mean, I referenced it a second ago, but I remember when he got that job, but just when he became the interim coach. And again, talking about my father, my opinion of coaches growing up was largely based on my dad was a side judge and field judge, so he's the guy that's on the sideline interacting with the coach throughout the game. In fact, he has, to this day, he's retired, but in his office, he has a wall of photographs of him being screamed at by coaches, and it's phenomenal. The only one who was not being screamed at is a great picture of him and Frank Howard standing on the sideline of Clemson laughing. So Dad got to know Dabo. He got to know a lot of these guys, just prowling the sideline. And when Dabo got that job, the interim job, I'll never forget Dad saying, "Man, I love that guy so much. He's not ready for this." And I remember thinking the same thing, but also, and a lot of us had this opportunity. I remember being in the office, and Bowden's stuff was still like in bubble wrap on the floor. And I'll never forget Dabo pulling out those 3-ring binders and being like, "Listen, this is what I learned from Gene Stallings. This is what I learned from Mike Bowe. This is what I learned from so-and-so, so-and-so." And I've always said, if I ever have the chance to be a head coach, this is how I'm going to do it. And I was so blown away by that. And he said, if they'll just give me a chance, then I know we can do it. And, again, great guy, had a plan. I never thought in a million years they'd let him do it. I thought he's going to have to go somewhere and be an offensive coordinator. He's going to have to go be, the head coach at, I don't know, some Southern Conference school, and then maybe he'll get this chance. And so when he got the job full time, a lot of people now want to say that they knew this was going to happen. The reality is no one thought it was going to happen, and everyone killed the school for making that move. And so what he's built is phenomenal. I mean, it's amazing, and just the depth of the roster. So when I travel the country, like Notre Dame, I saw Notre Dame at Stanford, or saw Stanford at Notre Dame middle of the season. And, the last time I had seen Notre Dame in person was against Alabama in the championship game. And this Notre Dame team is so much bigger and so much faster than that team was. And their first 22 is really good. But when you really appreciate Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, is when you don't just look at the guys who are in the starting 22, but the next 22, and the guys who aren't even getting to play. And the depth is what just shocks you when you look at Clemson versus, when I travel the country and see a lot of other schools that are, routinely in the top 25, top 10. And so what he's done depth-wise is just crazy. And the all-in thing, I wrote this column the first year they played Alabama in the championship game because I knew it, because again, I graduated high school just up the road. The all-in thing is for real. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about people like, man, can Dabo really be like that? He is. And the all-in thing is for real, and everybody has to be for it to work the way that it's worked. So I give a lot of credit to a lot of people because what they've built there, man, better than anybody on the planet. They were pretty good for 20 years. And I didn't know if they would ever have the chance to be great again. And they are, and they have the chance, I think, to be great for at least another decade.
So you came and did an interview with him in his office back in 2008, is that right?
Yeah, there were a couple of us that went up there. There were a couple of us that went into his office, I was there. I'm trying to think of who was there from the Greenville News. There were 3 or 4 of us, and he brought those 3-ring binders out and was like, "Let me show you this. And Gene Stallings taught me this, and so-and-so taught me that." And I had just come back to ESPN to write for ESPN, the magazine, full time, and I had the chance to be one of those handful of guys.
Those binders, Ryan. What's even more fascinating is if you look at them now, and you see the vision he had. A lot of the stuff that they've done, from facilities to support staff, and the all-in concept, and all the way down to coaches he had his eye on then, who he hired like 4 and 5 years later. Yeah. All this stuff has happened, and it's amazing when you read that in hindsight at the vision he had at that time.
Well, and Gene Stallings, and keep in mind now, I graduated from Tennessee in 1993, so I hated Gene Stallings so much because, when I was in school, Alabama, it was the previous longest losing streak to Alabama by Tennessee up until, that's been broken now. But I hated him so much, but now I'm crazy about him. And one of the things that Coach Stallings has told me several times, talking about rebuilding Alabama and talking about what Dabo's done, is, it's a chess game. And if all you're thinking about is the move that's happening right now, you're doomed. You have to be thinking about your move 6 moves from now. He was talking about these Kasparov and all these Russian chess masters, and he's like, all those guys are already thinking 4, 5, 6, 7 moves ahead. And that's what Dabo was doing. It was a legit plan. It wasn't just and the mistake you usually see, and we see it a lot these days, is when a coach becomes a coach for the first time, is the CEO stuff that eats them alive. They know how to coach football, but it's the other stuff that eats them alive, and they're just worried about the next game, as opposed to, all right, you got to worry about the next game, but you also got to worry about your recruiting class 4 years from now, or what your facility is going to look like 6 years from now. And he had all that mapped out, and it's just I've always wondered how much time he spent during those 3 years in commercial real estate, which, by the way, as you know, he was really good at. But how much time did he spend with the door shut to his office, sitting there just daydreaming? Man, if I had a chance to do this, I would do this. If I had a chance to do that, I would do that. And already, looking up this coach and that coach and what's that guy doing, what's this guy doing, because and didn't have the opportunity to execute all that. It's just it's incredible. I mean, you can't make it up.
You mentioned the depth of talent that just jumps out at you when you see Clemson and Alabama and even Georgia. This time last year, as Clemson's getting ready for its semifinal against Alabama, obviously Alabama's defense was beat up, tired, as evidenced in their regular season finale in the Iron Bowl. I think it was Hootie Jones who was out, their safety. And I remember saying, okay, who's the next guy? Deontay Thompson. He's played only like 70 snaps. One of the Alabama writers says, man, he can't be that good. He's only played this many snaps. I said, yeah. I mean, that played a role in my prediction for the game. I'm thinking they can't. Yeah. And now this guy is an absolute assassin at safety. And then Daron Payne, the guy who just wreaked absolute havoc in the Sugar Bowl, the guy behind him, Quinnen Williams, who might be the best player in the country this year. And Clemson has that going also on the defensive line and receiver, obviously quarterback. What does the future look like as these few teams continue stockpiling talent, and the gap between top 4 and that number 10 team, number 10, 11, seems wider than ever? Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not at all. And that's what when I go to Big Ten schools, or I go to Pac-12 schools, and that's the question. They're also, we're pretty close, right? And you're not. And some of that's facilities. I mean, some of that, obviously, and listen, we're talking about facilities. Clemson's so over the top, it's hard to even have that conversation. But what it really comes down to is the roster. And what it really comes down to is what you're talking about, which is everybody thinks that they're 1 or 2 players away from closing the gap. And the reality is they're 15 players away from closing the gap. And what's amazing to me about what Nick Saban has done and what Dabo has managed to do is keeping everybody pretty happy. Because I think, again, going back to my NC State roots, I think back to Jim Valvano always talked about the most difficult job that he had was the team after, the Cardiac Pack National Championship team, because he said it was easy to get the guys on the 83 team to gel as a team because they were all in this together. He said, but the next year, he said he had 2 or 3 McDonald's All-Americans sitting on the bench and angry because they'd never been on the bench in their life. And so what just continues to fascinate me about Alabama is that for more than a decade now, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, is that Nick Saban can keep everybody pacified. Because the guys you were just talking about, he can convince them, if you're willing to just basically sit out for a year or two, then I promise you that the 1 or 2 years you're the starter, you're going to be regarded the best of your position. You got a chance to win the Outland Trophy. You got a chance to do whatever. And Dabo's managed to do that too. Now, you'll see little cracks in it. This year, all across the country, we've seen, quarterbacks very angry very quickly and filing their transfer papers just as quickly. But for the most part, those guys have been able to keep everybody pretty high. I was talking to Kirby Smart about this at Georgia. He said that's the biggest challenge is, with these recruiting classes is convincing these guys. And listen, the guy you're going to be backing up this year is probably going to win the Bednarik Award. So you just need to hang on for a year, and next year will be your chance. But it's convincing those guys that you're going to have to work out practice every day just as hard as the next guy, but you might not get to play except for in the fourth quarter against, Alcorn State.
Another thing, Ryan, that most people probably don't appreciate enough with Alabama, and I think Clemson as well, probably Georgia, is how those coaches are able to keep the chip on the shoulder in the face of rich success. And I think a great example of that is if either of those teams are up 30, if you took the score off the screen and you watched them play, backups, playing, and a mix of backups and starters, you would swear the score were still 0-0. They're still going for the throat of the other team. And Dabo's the master at it, which is Nick Saban's begging us to write something negative about the team right out in the open. And, I wrote a column about this the Sunday after the SEC championship. I was down in, of course, you guys were 10 minutes from my house in Charlotte, and I had to go to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. But I wrote the column about, Nick Saban, as stressed as his fan base was about that game and Tua being hurt and they're trailing with a minute to go and all that, Saban totally dug it. He loved it. And the reason was because he wanted some adversity. He needed something to motivate the team. And Dabo, with his whole, it's what Alabama and the rest of us, and we're one of the rest of us and all that stuff, is genius. Because he's creating us versus them when everybody, them all know that us is better than them, and how they manage to do that is amazing. And that's what I'm talking about. I say this all the time. When you're a head coach at any team at the FCS level or FBS level, but particularly a team that's operating at the top tiny percentage of that level, there's this pie chart of what the job is. And football, actual X's and O's football, is really not that big of a part of it. It's not. Even for a guy like Saban, who's out there running, DB practice every day, that's still the smallest percentage of what he does. The rest of it is sports psychologist and counselor and, academic advisor and, and then motivator. I mean, it's amazing. And that's why the best can manage all of those things. And the rest of them usually are not very good at big parts of that pie chart. And that's what makes Dabo and Nick and some of these other guys so amazing. Ryan, you gave me a lot of your time at the spur of the moment during a busy time for you, so I am greatly appreciative, and this was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, man, anytime, and hopefully we'll get to sit shoulder to shoulder out in Santa Clara in a few weeks.
Yeah, man, we can get on Twitter and watch our feeds while the game's taking place, right?
That's right, absolutely. It's only the national championship.
Have a great weekend and a great holiday, man.
All right, brother, thanks.
Take care. All right, that was great. Man, what a cool guy. Going to have him back on. maybe out in maybe as soon as San Jose, if Clemson is lucky enough to get out there. So thanks to Ryan for sharing his time on such short notice. Really appreciate that. Also appreciate our sponsors, title sponsor Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville, the Abernethy Boutique Hotel in Clemson, and finally, Tandem Payment in Greenville. Really appreciate the support of all of our sponsors. Couldn't do it without them. Also appreciate all of you for making this a part of your routine. Next one scheduled to drop as usual Monday morning. So stay tuned. Everybody have a great weekend. Cheers.